Hello. Our main focus today is Antonioni's own primary focus and blow-up. That is, Thomas's enlargement, arrangement, and attempted interpretation of the photographs he took of the couple that we saw in the park, an encounter I discussed at the end of my last lecture. I want to provide some theoretical context for the epistemological and hermeneutic and ethical questions Antonioni is exploring in Thomas's obsession with these photographs. So I'm going to begin today with an overview of several influential theoretical assessments of the relationship between a photographic image and reality. One of the first and most influential views came from the early 20th century French painter Fernand Léger, an artist known for his canvases of huge industrial forms. Léger celebrated machine-induced changes in visual perception, and he regarded these changes as a defining feature of modern experience. Léger held that both still photography and early film had the ability to waken us from our dull habits of seeing the world and to show us its hidden features in a new, luminous light. Formulating what he called a machine aesthetic, Léger argued that film, especially in close-ups, revealed the neglected beauty of everyday objects that we don't usually register. As he put it, quote, "The cinematographic revolution is to make us see everything that has merely been noticed." For Léger, this includes, quote, 80% of the elements in our daily lives. In an essay on the silent film director Abel Gance, Léger championed the illuminating potency of the camera's, quote, fixed or moving mechanical fragments. These photographic interventions make us see ordinary things in a new way, he said. Well, far from superimposing a mediated veil between the eye and the object world, for Léger, photography and film intensify the viewer's encounter with the real by defamiliarizing the object world that we register habitually and showing us fascinating small details that we inevitably overlook with our naked eye. Writing in the 1930s, 2 decades after Léger, the great German cultural theorist Walter Benjamin agreed that, quote, a different nature opens itself to the camera than opens to the naked eye. Thomas discovers this when he develops his footage and finds that a camera image can capture things that his eye missed. Benjamin argues that a photographer or a director's camera can achieve what he calls a thoroughgoing permeation of reality with mechanical equipment. But, unlike Léger, Benjamin also feared the consequences of this permeation of reality over time. Specifically, Benjamin cautioned that photographic and cinematographic representations of the material world had proliferated and become so common from advertising and movies that these images were inducing what he called, quote, an unconscious optics. By this, Benjamin meant that the assault of photographic images of media was becoming stored up within the unconscious psyches of modern men and women so that they were viewing the world through these assimilated images rather than through their own unmediated eyes. Thus, although the camera could, as Benjamin and Léger both note, penetrate reality's hidden recesses, Benjamin argues that the modern viewer's long-standing absorption of these images has created, paradoxically, an alienating veil between the modern individual mind and the object world. Benjamin states this danger most memorably in his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Here he complains that, quote, the sight of immediate reality has now become a rare orchid in the land of technology. Now, this was in the late 1930s. Imagine what Benjamin would say about technologically mediated experience today in the digital age. In the early 1960s, the Marxist theorist Guy Debord went even further than Benjamin in his cautionary work, Society of the Spectacle. Unlike Léger and Benjamin, Debord contends that photographic images never reveal hidden realities or bring us into closer contact with the world. Instead, he says, the camera always produces a mediating distance, separating us from reality. For Debord, the barrage of photographic images registered by the mind every day has created a society that experiences the world itself through the camera's mediations. Reality becomes, as he puts it, mere spectacle. Now, Debord writes that this is a widespread condition in which, quote, the viewer's consciousness is imprisoned in a flattened universe, bounded by the screen of photographic spectacles behind which life has departed. So on the one hand, we have Leger's conviction that photographs allow us to penetrate reality more deeply and to grasp elemental truths contained there. And on the other hand, we have Debord's insistence that the camera inevitably intervenes between the viewer and the real world, imprisoning us in a web of mechanically generated illusions. Now, I don't want to suggest that Antonioni is responding directly to either Leger or Debord's specific works, but he's definitely exploring the oppositional ideas that these two advance. And as we'll see, I think, Blow Up considers these contrasting views of the relationship between photography and reality in a way that paradoxically seems at different points and in different contexts to endorse both views. Now, there are two other classic approaches to photography, and by implication to cinema, that I want to mention. Those found in Susan Sontag's On Photography and in the French theorist Roland Barthes' study Camera Lucida. Both were published a decade after Blow Up was made, but Antonioni anticipates some of the ideas in these works, I think, what they advance. Sontag argues that the photographer, quote, gazes at other people's reality with curiosity and with his camera attempts, quote, to contact or lay claim to these other existences. In short, she suggests that photography is an attempt to bridge the gap between self and other, especially in large impersonal cities like New York or London. Like Leger, Sontag believes that photography can, quote, peel away the dry wrapper of habitual seeing by illuminating details and complex structures of objects, and in so doing, photography can even allow us to solve certain mysteries. She quotes the famous French photographer Cartier-Bresson, who says that a photograph can make us see that, quote, in all this chaos, there is order. It's a remark that recalls the scene you remember I discussed last class when Thomas's painter friend Bill explains how he finds points of meaning and order when he looks back at details in his own work. Order and some deeper meaning are what Thomas is himself seeking when he blows up and assembles the pictures that he took in the park. But the problem, as Sontag explains, is that although photography can be revelatory, photography isn't simply an objective medium. She points out a crucial inconsistency here that Leger overlooks. It's this: although photographs are thought to possess a, quote, innocent and therefore completely, quote, accurate relation to visible reality, in truth, even the most spontaneous shots are actually, quote, narrowly selective transparencies that reflect the inclination, the structuring, and the taste of the viewer, the person behind the camera lens. From this perspective, then, even though Thomas thought that the shots he took in the park were objective and spontaneous records, his presence behind the camera alone indicates some intention and structuring. And this subjectivity inherent in photography, in taking pictures, becomes even more pronounced when he magnifies and assembles the shots and attempts to interpret them. In arranging them, he chooses to isolate and to enlarge specific details so as to fashion an attempted interpretation of what the camera captured. It's an interpretation based on details that his naked eye missed, but one that ultimately fails to cohere, fails to arrive at any truth. Like Sontag, Roland Barthes notes what he calls the photographic paradox. He writes that the photographic image is at once, quote, objective, professing to be a mechanical analog to reality, but that it is also, quote, invested with subjective intention and connotative messages. Yet Barthes, I think, more than any of the critics I've mentioned, believes that certain rare photographs have the ability to transcend their medium. That is, they have the potential not just to illuminate hidden dimensions of reality unseen by the eye, as Leger would have it, but that they can go further, that certain photographs can actually create for the photographer or the viewer an intense intersubjective connection with the photographed image that is more authentic and intense than the viewer could experience looking at the actual object just with his or her naked eye in the physical world. Barthes says of these rare transcendent camera images, quote, "The photographed body in them touches me with its own rays, which are felt as an emanation of the referent, something that one would not necessarily feel simply looking at the object up close without the camera." For Barth, then, such photographs have, quote, "a power of authentication that exceeds their power of representation." These snapshots, he describes, have what he terms an evidential force that, quote, "authenticates the subject for the viewer, penetrates our awareness like an arrow in a radiant moment of discovery." This authentication, this evidential force, is precisely what Thomas is seeking as he looks closer and closer at the shots he took in the park, observing, like a detective, details that his eye overlooked, but that the camera did not. Now, at moments, Thomas feels he's not just about to grasp, but to penetrate the truth of what was going on in that park as the images seem to open up to him in a way that Barth describes. But, as I've noted, this utopian hope ultimately ends in doubt and confusion as, in Antonioni's own words, quote, "reality always eludes us." Well, before I investigate the photographer's investigations, I want to consider Thomas's brief encounter with the young owner of the antique store, to which he returns after he leaves the park, having taken his pictures. Now, we've seen that Thomas feels cynicism and disgust for the youthful pop culture that both his age and his lucrative profession as a fashion photographer make him part of. He despises being involved in that world. And his desire to escape contemporary London leads him to nature, but it also leads him to the past as refuges. As he browses in the small antique store, he even says, reports to his secretary that he would like to buy it. And while he's there, he flirts with the shop's bored young owner, who is playing old records. Have a look at the scene.
Hello?
Hello?
My agent saw you about the shop.
Did he?
He's a man with a cigar. Throws ash everywhere.
I expect I remember him. I probably asked for too much money. Money is always a problem, isn't it? Tell him to come back.
Why are you selling?
I'd like to try something different. Get off somewhere. I'm fed up with antiques.
Get off where?
To Nepal.
Nepal is all antiques.
Is it?
Uh-huh.
Perhaps I better try Morocco.
How much?
What?
A propeller.
You can have it for £8.
Right, you're in business. Have you got a van?
You can't take it now.
I must. I must. I can't live without it.
Hard luck. That'll teach you to fall in love with heavy things on Saturday mornings. Is that it?
That's it.
You can't treat it like that. It's not a delivery van.
Who cares?
Leave it to me. Something will turn up.
Yes, all right, but it better turn up today. Oi!
Whereas Thomas sees the past as an escape from superficial modernity, the clueless woman who runs the store wants to escape from the past, she says, by going to Nepal or Morocco, apparently not realizing that these are ancient civilizations. Thomas buys an early aviation wooden propeller, partly because he wants an alluring prop for his apartment, which already contains 2 Rococo stone Madonnas. But he's also drawn to the stillness of old decorative objects like this, in contrast to the transience of the present, where he deals in ephemeral fashions that are always changing in his job as a fashion photographer. Thomas knows that the neighborhood around the antique store is becoming fashionable itself, and he regrets this, as he tells his secretary, quote, "It's getting full of queers and poodles, and it will soon go up like a bomb, obliterating the past with lots of new shops and gentrification." This is why Thomas wants to buy the junk shop, as he calls it, itself. The modern world is moving in on it far too quickly and too closely, and Thomas craves both the shop's contents and the lost stability that the shop itself represents. This craving is also why Thomas fetishizes his eclectic collection of old objects from different cultures. Yet curiously, Thomas's desire for permanence does not extend to his view of the uses of his own medium of photography, because photographs, after all, have the unique ability to preserve the past in the midst of change, to capture a fast-fading world in images held in timeless suspension. And the fact that Thomas never considers this function of photography suggests that he's more of a member of his generation, perhaps, than he would like to acknowledge. Still, when we next see Thomas, he's talking with his publisher in a restaurant, and it's clear that he aspires to be a serious photographer, not by means of historical preservation, but rather by giving truthful renderings of contemporary social realities. Now, as antidotes to the glitz and the glamour and the confected sexuality of his studio, Thomas presents shots of poverty, infirmity, and destitution that he thinks genuinely capture those realities. Consider the scene.
You want to use a lock? Don't you like it? Agree. We use 3 or 4. Spread through the book? No, all together. Yeah. And a pint.
Yes, sir.
Which one last?
None of this lot. I've got something fab for the end. In a park. I only took them this morning. We'll get them later on today. It's very peaceful, very still. And the rest of the book will be pretty violent, so I think it's best to end it like that. Hmm?
Yeah. That's best. Rings true.
I've gone off London this week.
Why?
Doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. I've knocked up a few captions.
Yeah? I'm fed up with those bloody bitches. Wish I had tons of money. Then I'd be free.
Free to do what? Free like him? Someone we know? I'll be all right.
Thomas shows the publisher stark black and white photographs of the denizens of homeless shelters and flop houses that he'd photographed undercover just before the film opened. He says he wants these dire scenes all together in the book as a strong dose of truth, but he wants to end this gallery filled with images of privation, refugees, and violence with the shots that he took that afternoon in the park and has not yet developed. Images that look still and peaceful when he took them, but which he believes are no less authentic than the others. Now, ironically, what Thomas thinks is a serene scene that he captured contains images of violence and death itself, as he discovers when he enlarges the photos and finds that what he thought was a spontaneous scene of lovers in a pastoral green field was actually a mysteriously scripted and deadly performance of some kind. Early in the conversation with the publisher, Ron, Thomas looks out the window, clearly wondering if the woman who was so desperate to get the footage that she bid him is perhaps following him. She is following him, along with a mysterious tall man, not the older man she was embracing in the park, but someone else. This younger man peers in the cafe window, but he then turns away before Thomas or we can see his face. Then, as Thomas watches out the window, the man tries unsuccessfully to open the trunk of the Rolls-Royce in search of the photographic stills, or negatives, before returning to his car and appearing to drive off. Actually, however, he's waiting in the car for Thomas, and in that car, he follows Thomas through the city. Sensing this, Thomas looks over his shoulder while he's turning a corner, as he had turned his head to look out the window in the cafe. And in this moment, Antonioni allows the viewer a fleeting glimpse into that gray car that is following Thomas. In it we see the red-haired woman who had demanded the film and the tall man driving the car who had tried to open Thomas's trunk. That's the only look we get at him. Now, aware that he's being followed, Thomas seems more amused by the persistence of his pursuers and threatened by it. He shows no urgency, for example, to get away from them when he stops to let an anti-nuclear demonstration of peace activists pass, and he smiles when one of them puts a "Get Out" poster in his car. It blows away a moment later, but Thomas doesn't care about the sign's political message. Rather, he likes the personal applicability of that phrase, "get out," because getting out is exactly what he wants to do. He tells the publisher that he's leaving London for the weekend and that he'd like to get free of the city by leaving it and his job for good, if only he had so much money that he didn't have to work. Well, the publisher points out that only the destitute are completely free of the responsibilities that Thomas finds so oppressive. When Thomas gets to his own street, he gets out of his car and looks around for his pursuers, camera in hand, and even blares his horn as if to draw them out, to indicate, "I know you're following me." As he's opening his door, the desperate red-headed woman accosts him. It seems that she and the tall man have been following him since the encounter in the park that morning. Once again, Thomas enjoys his power over the woman and expects, as a consequence of his having the film footage, an easy seduction. He invites her in, puts on a jazz record, gives her a drink and a joint. He tells her to relax, but she points out that she can't relax because she says the images in his camera would destroy her personal life, which is already, quote, a disaster. He promises that he'll give her the negatives, but only, he says, when he's ready. And he asks her if she's ever worked as a model. He's flattering her here. He flatters her on the way she sits and even has her pose in front of the purple backdrop he uses. But neither the flattery nor the pot can put her at ease. She asks for a glass of water in order to try to steal Thomas's camera while he's getting it, that camera containing the film, but Thomas anticipates this ploy and stops her at the door. "I'm not a fool, love," he says. Two things about Thomas's relation to women emerge even more clearly in this part of the scene than they have before. First, Thomas is a misogynist. He not only dislikes the glamorous birds that he has to work with each day to earn a living, but he resents women in general as impediments to his existential freedom. When the phone rings, he lunges for it and then hands it to his guest. He tells her that it's his wife ringing up, or maybe they're not married. In any case, they no longer live together. The act of putting the visitor on the phone, as if she were the latest conquest, is a nasty joke directed against both women, intended to make the visitor uncomfortable and the former partner enraged and jealous. Thomas prefers women who make no demands of him. He likes women who are silent and obliging insofar as he can tolerate them at all, like Patricia, who massages his head, gives him beer, and like those twin stone Madonnas in his studio, one of whom wears a doily on her head, a head that Thomas likes to pat fondly as if it were a dog. Now, the second feature of Thomas's relations with women that we see here is that he doesn't really know how to talk to them as human beings, at least at this point in the scene. Just as he imposes a preconceived formula on the world when he thinks he's photographing a scene of carefree love in the park, so too he imposes a formula on women that allows him to relate to them in only one of two reductive ways. Either they must be ordered about like his models, quote, whom I'm stuck with all day long, he says, or they must be seduced and then abandoned. Both are acts of control. And Thomas attempts, in fact, both of these with his visitor. First, he treats her like an aspiring model, telling her where to stand, ordering her to sit, and using her desperation to heighten the sexual tension. But what follows is a more complex and intriguing interaction than Thomas is accustomed to with women. Have a look.
Why didn't you say what you want?
Getting dressed. I cut out the negatives you want. They'll go.
They're not going. Don't go.
Have you bought propeller? What?
You bought a propeller this morning, right?
Oh, yes.
You have to give us a hand with it. All right?
Fine.
What's it for?
Nothing. It's beautiful.
If I had a big room like this, I'd hang it from the ceiling like a fan.
You live on your own?
No.
Perhaps I'll put it there like a piece of sculpture.
Look good there. It'll break up the straight lines.
Are you going?
It's late.
Do I see you again? Well, at least tell me your name or your telephone number.
Thank you.
The woman's striptease begins as an absolutely transparent ploy to get the film negatives by offering her body sexually. But this kind of exchange would be too crassly commercial to please Thomas. That is to say, there wouldn't be any sadistic pleasure in overcoming the woman's resistance through such a simple quid pro quo. So, as an alternative exercise in male power, Thomas now does something different. He tells the half-naked woman to go and get dressed. He's not going to exercise power over her the way he had through the simulated sex with Varushka in the fashion shoot earlier. Now he exercises power simply by dismissing her, thereby indicating that he does not want her sexually. He tells her that he's cut out the negatives that she demanded, that she had begged for. He gives them to her. She takes them, but then, curiously, she tosses the roll onto her blouse as the two of them are headed into the bedroom. What has happened here? Well, she does this because the woman now wants more than just the film that she has acquired. She wants to reverse the power dynamic. She's been forced to exhibit herself as a sexual object in an attempt to get these incriminating shots. And in fact, throughout the entire scene, or much of it, she has walked around naked from the waist up, uncomfortable and supremely vulnerable. In fact, her vulnerability as she crosses her arms over her breasts recalls her vulnerability in the park earlier, a sense of exposure. It's notable that using elaborate camera choreography in this scene, Antonioni avoids showing a frontal view of the woman's breasts, but ironically, by that very avoidance, he calls attention to them. He foregrounds her breasts, one might say, in the mind of the male viewer who keeps expecting a peek. Well, having been objectified this way, under duress, the woman now attempts to assert power herself by voluntarily choosing to have sex with Thomas in his bedroom when it isn't required of her. She may be genuinely aroused here, but she clearly, I think more emphatically, wants to demonstrate that she is no longer acting under his coercion. She's a free agent. Thomas seems surprised by this move. It's not what women he's known normally do. Well, when the doorbell rings as they stand in the bedroom door, their vacillating sexual power struggle continues. Thomas says the visitor will certainly go away, and he plans to ignore it. But the woman counters this, saying, no, they're not going away, suggesting you better go down and answer it. But then, when he starts to leave to answer the door, she tells him, ordering him, no, don't go. That order, in turn, moves Thomas to go to the door in defiance of her. He finds a delivery man there, bringing the propeller he bought at the antique store. This acquisition leads Thomas to a surprising conversation with the nameless woman, unlike any, it seems, he'd had with the women who frequent his studio. She says she admires the purchase and suggests that he suspend the propeller from the ceiling like a fan. Thomas is so intrigued by her taste that he now wants to return to the bedroom. Something surprising in a man who is jaded, bored by anonymous sex, and, quote, fed up with the bitches he sees all over London. But now it is the woman who breaks off their imminent sexual pleasure. Checking her watch, she announces that she has to leave and hastily departs. It's a wonderful final reversal because she does this wearing her blouse now, while Thomas is the one who is shirtless. Within 2 minutes, the power has shifted repeatedly back and forth between these two distrustful antagonists. And the effect of that movement back and forth and the delay and final diffusing of it, the effect of that back and forth and delay is to increase sexual desire for both of them through these acts of deferral and postponement. Antonioni himself uses delay as a strategy in this part of the film himself to heighten the viewer's interest. We saw Thomas, remember, take the pictures, but there have been now several delays that have postponed both his and the viewer's discovery of what those photos contain that could cause a woman such desperate consternation. We want to know. Well, what emerges after the delay, when the real is developed, are glimpses of a mysterious reality that existed independent of Thomas's act of looking, or certainly independent of his awareness with his naked eye. The camera captured details that were invisible to that eye, and his discovery begins when he spots something unexpectedly on the reel of shots that he has taken. And this moves him then, as I noted, to apply a magnifying glass to the roll, and thereby spurs immediately his interest to print the shots and then to enlarge them. Now, the most important events in the film are the long, wordless sequences in which Thomas blows up selected pieces of the footage he has acquired and arranges these shots in a kind of temporal narrative on his wall, like the succession of celluloid frames, in fact, in the film that we are watching. Thomas undertakes this work obsessively, as if he has just awoken from a dream. Having contributed to the creation of so many fabricated illusions in his job, he's now driven to understand something he hopes is real, the meaning of what his camera captured quite beyond his conscious knowledge or intention. Thomas's interpretive quest falls into two parts, both of which I'll discuss. And in both, we'll see Antonioni in his famous habit of eliminating dialogue and thereby placing maximum emphasis on mise-en-scène and slow camera movements. The thematic and dramatic center of the film, which we see in these sequences, is entirely silent. And what we get is a meticulously constructed, step-by-step presentation of Thomas as a photographic detective, a process in which the viewer is also positioned as a detective, but really in a double sense. At first, we try to determine what Thomas notices so that then, when we do understand that, we can try with him to determine what the camera captured in the park. Put simply, we have first to interpret what Thomas is doing in order then to interpret with him what the film shows. Well, as noted, this hermeneutic process begins just before the clip, when Thomas moves a magnifying glass over the set, over the roll of film, something that he would do really with any collection of shots. But a detail catches his eye, and he marks it with a pencil. Next, he projects two of the shots on a screen and then enlarges them. One is a shot of the couple holding hands and leaning away from each other playfully, and the other is of the same couple in what appears to be an embrace, but with the woman's face turned strangely toward the trees. It seems that something has diverted her at this moment. We and Thomas thought that she had noticed he was taking pictures and had turned her head, but that came later. Here she's actually looking in another direction. What intrigues Thomas, then, is the mystery of cause and effect suggested by her averted gaze. Why is she looking away? Who or what is she looking at? Who is in those trees? Well, the arrangement of the two photos in sequence is an unmistakably self-referential gesture on Antonioni's part. It reminds us that the film we're watching and trying to interpret ourselves is composed of separate photographic frames that reveal sequences of action. And ultimately, the film's meaning may prove as elusive as the significance of the series of enlarged images that the photographer is now studying. Thomas's next step is to blow up a fragment of the second already enlarged photo. Now we see the anxious expression on the woman's face as she looks toward the trees, so the mystery deepens. You'll note at this point that Antonioni pulls back from Thomas for a moment, or a short period, to show him in a long shot with a kind of occluded view. We see him framed in the background between the backs of two enlarged prints in the foreground. It's the construction of a keyhole view, the perspective of a voyeur, and it's a reminder that Thomas took these shots as a voyeur, hiding first behind a fence and then behind a tree. Now, the object of Thomas's fascination now is also hidden behind that fence. Going over the doubly enlarged photograph with a magnifying glass in an extended take, Thomas marks a square in pencil and then makes a third enlargement of the area near the trees. This grainy blow-up shows a low fence and nearby what appears to be a gun lying in the bushes. This gun, this image, this magnified bit of celluloid is the fruit of Thomas's systematic investigation, and it is his first real clue. We recall his friend the painter said that when he looked at his work, his own work, his canvases, he often would see a detail that gives him something to hang on to, that gives his entire composition a meaning that he didn't realize at the time of its creation. Well, the same is what Thomas thinks he's on to here, this fragment that he hopes will reveal something that will make sense, that will all hang together. But Thomas's kinship with Antonioni here is also unmistakable. In arranging the black and white photographs on the wall, Thomas is reworking the sequence of shots that we saw earlier when he was in the park through Antonioni's lens. But there is one difference, and that is this. Antonioni filmed those scenes in vibrant color, but Thomas shot the images in black and white. In fact, all of the photos in the book he's compiling are in black and white because black and white carries associations of documentary social realism, of authenticity, of seriousness, the hallmarks, for example, of Italian neorealism. By contrast, Thomas associates color film footage with the deceptions of his practice as a fashion photographer. He associates it with advertising, glamour, and the artificially eroticized female body. Well, Thomas positions the shadowy, blown-up image of the gun near an enlarged shot of the woman rushing toward him after she had spotted him. And in between these two images is the one of the woman gazing with a look of alarm toward the trees. How do they add up? Well, Thomas then adds more blow-ups, including one in which the older man is now gazing at something with an expression of concern off to the side. The more enlarged images Thomas adds, the more the arrangement resembles a film narrative of the kind that we are watching. In fact, as Antonioni's camera pans over the photographic arrangement, it resembles that arrangement, a black and white film played as if in slow motion. But there are gaps in this action. There are breaks in the temporal sequence of these shots that form a narrative, gaps and breaks that Thomas needs to fill through acts of interpretation. And doing so involves intuition and imagination, as well as memory and deductive thinking, everything that goes into the solving of a detective's story, and he sees himself as a detective. The next clue comes when Thomas makes still another enlargement of that fence near the trees, but this one from an earlier shot that he took. Have a look.
Ron? Something fantastic's happened. Those photographs in the park. Fantastic. Somebody was trying to kill somebody else. I saved his life. Listen, Ron, there was a girl. Ron, will you listen? What makes it so fantastic? Look, hang on, will you, Ron? There's somebody at the door.
Thomas and the attentive viewer, who's now caught up with him, now see in this enlarged image a man's blurry face and his hand holding a gun. Based on the ordering of shots that Thomas has blown up and arranged, he now calls his publisher, Ron, and with misplaced confidence describes the, quote, fantastic discovery he's made. On the basis of his enlargements, he's sure that his presence, or maybe the woman's discovery of his presence, caused a distraction that prevented a murder. I saved a life, he says. He speaks here with both the satisfaction of a successful detective and with the moral gratification of a hero. He assumes at this point that the gunman in the bushes had intended to kill the woman's partner, but that he had fled, leaving the unfired gun behind. If this were true, It would be a dazzling confirmation of Legère's idea of the camera as capable of revealing truths that the naked eye passes over in its view of the world. In fact, Thomas is so dazzled by the discovery that it's almost like one of those photographs Barth describes that penetrates the viewer's consciousness like the rays from a distant star. The camera certainly reveals more here than Thomas's naked eye saw, but his interpretation of the reality he thinks he sees here proves to be wrong, just as the phone number that the woman gave him when she was leaving isn't a true one. Antonioni hints at Thomas's misconception also here in another way. As he's talking to his editors so enthusiastically about his fortunate interruption of an attempted murder, Thomas is himself interrupted by the teenage girls that he had dismissed earlier. His cavorting with them a moment later undercuts both his detective work and his premature conclusion about what actually transpired in the park. This distraction also jars the viewer. Given our drive to understand along with Thomas what occurred in the park and why the woman demanded the negatives, and is the tall man, in fact, the killer of the older man, given our desire to understand all of those questions, we may react to this intrusion of these girls with frustration, or at least initially. Thomas does later return to his investigative labors, but only after the most controversial scene in the film. These girls, who show up again uninvited, are wannabe models. They're products of a materialistic and depersonalized culture, and they have been seduced by the narcissistic dream of appearing like the models they see in ads and fashion magazines. In short, they inhabit the media-distorted, flattened perceptual universe that Guy Debord describes. What they experience isn't reality, but a simulacrum shaped by advertising, and they see the entire world through the medium of advertising. Well, as they enter giggling in their day-glow leotards and preen for Thomas, they embody everything he loathes in London as an aspiring serious photographer who is in search of the real. These girls represent the antithesis. So why then does he let them in? Well, probably because Thomas feels at this moment that he's entitled to some mindless recreational sex after his diligent and, he believes, successful investigative work. It's a little reward to himself, something like junk food, despised yet delectable. He doesn't want to know the girls' names because Thomas regards them as anonymous and interchangeable. What good are names, he tells them. Let's have a look at this scene.
She's got a better figure than me. It's not true.
Go on, Wacker, go on, give her a lift too. I'll put you in the ring together.
As the scene unfolds, it's clear that the source of the girls' sexual arousal is not Thomas, though he is a famous photographer, but rather they're aroused by the clothing that they find and secretly try on. It's a source of such autoerotic excitement for both of them that they writhe and wrestle together on top of this designer wear in a state of panting hysteria. For the girls, the three-way sex that follows is merely narcissistic, driven by their fetishizing of objects they've seen in pictures and this glamorous studio itself, full of lights and mirrors, reflects them in ways that gratify their narcissistic longing. Now, in this regard, the teenager's arousal isn't so much different from the narcissistic arousal of Vorushka in the simulated sex scene earlier in the film. Well, the orgiastic romp begins when Thomas tries to tear a dress off one of them, and it ends when the naked girls pull him down to cavort with them on a sheet of lavender-colored lighting paper. For Thomas, once again, though, you might say, the only appeal in sex is power. And in this case, initially, the urge to power and dominance, that is his only sexual pleasure, is triggered by one of the girls' initial resistance and flight from him. When he tears the dress off her or tries, she even bites his hand, as the woman had in the park. Her companion had earlier claimed, "I only go to bed to sleep." Thus, there's a resistance that Thomas, bored though he is, feels erotically charged to dominate. Yet, ironically, by the time the girls pull Thomas down on top of them, they too are eager for sex, in fact, more aroused than he is. And as a result, the kind of sadistic conquest in overpowering resistant women that he often practices is short-circuited here. In fact, the girls undress Thomas. But where is Antonioni in all of this? Well, having aligned himself so closely with Thomas in previous scenes of detective work as Thomas seeks the truth, how now does Antonioni want us to respond to Thomas in this sexual fantasia? Well, independent of Antonioni's intentions and independent of his relation to Thomas, we also have to ask, how does a viewer today respond to this scene, a scene that was shot in 1966 at the height of the sexual revolution? Well, not surprisingly, the orgy scene has elicited vastly different responses. Some critics, mostly male, have been eager to defend this part of the film against moralists of all stripes. For example, William Arrowsmith, better known as a distinguished classical scholar, describes the scene this way, quote, "The whole sequence of sexual rough and tumble on the violet paper is meant to convey the sense of animal high spirits and childish gaiety. Nothing is salacious or offensive about it. The dominant note is childish play, animal hilarity. The whole scene is intentionally amoral, not immoral. There is no moral consequence to a tumble in the waves between two teenage nariads." Well, Arrowsmith, writing in the late 1970s, doesn't consider the imbalance of power through much of the scene between the famous fashion photographer and these young girls. But a female critic, Penelope Houston, describes Thomas here as, quote, rather unforgivingly, a man who accepts, exploits, and enjoys the contradictions of his society. That is, Thomas expresses contempt for the girls like these, and for pop culture that produces them, and yet he earns a handsome living by disseminating that culture in his photographs and dallying sexually with what he despises. In short, Houston suggests he's a hypocrite. Well, Peter Brunette goes much further in calling Thomas, quote, a predatory male and an obnoxious human being. Now, I am largely inclined toward that judgment myself, but I think one must ask what Antonioni intended here. Like everything else in the film, his intentions in this scene, I think, are ambiguous. At one level, he seems to be critiquing sexually exploitative male behavior and female narcissism. This is, after all, a man, Thomas, who dominates the females who parade in and out of his studio. And these are females who themselves seem incapable of any kind of genuine sexual or emotional response to another human being. But on another level, Antonioni's alignment of his own camera with Thomas's throughout the course of the film, on and off, and earlier in the scene with Verushka, has led some, like Burnett, to conclude that the director is here sharing in Thomas's sexual escapades, quote, vicariously, just as he identifies with Thomas as an artist. Well, it's possible, I think, that these opposing claims about Antonioni's view of Thomas, both on the one hand critical and on the other hand sort of vicarious enjoyment, may both be true at the same time, judging from the director's remark to an interviewer. Antonioni said, quote, "I love the life my protagonist, the photographer, leads. When I was preparing to make Blow Up, I also led this kind of life, and I had lots of fun. It was an agreeable life, but one that I was leading in order to follow the character, not because it was really my own." Thus, Antonio suggests that, yes, I enjoyed it, but it was only, after all, a kind of research, and it wasn't really me. It wouldn't be really what I would do. Well, notably then, I think we have to admit that the scene is unmistakably erotic, whether we regard it as a perverse eroticism or not. But the viewer today, male or female, is certainly more likely to regard Thomas's relations with women in general, and here in particular, as more a matter of misogynistic exploitation than carefree fun. Just as the meaning of a photograph in this film lies beyond the intention of the photographer, however, I think Antonioni would agree that the meaning of his film, and any part of it, including this scene, lies beyond the parameters of the director's intentions. I think Antonioni would acknowledge that, as such, the film's meaning, and this scene's meaning, changes with time and is different at a given point in the future than when it was received. As with Claire's Knee, I think, then, the challenge in responding to a film made over 50 years ago is to hold in suspension our contemporary thoughts about its meaning and feelings about its meanings, along with a reconstructed understanding of how it was received at the time of its release, whether or not we are ever able to determine the director's genuine intention. Well, from this perspective, then, interpretive meaning is not atemporal, but rather meaning operates on an unfolding continuum. But here, Blow Up, I think, poses a special problem when we talk about meaning, because the difficulty lies in finding any meaning, irrespective of one's historical position. What the film is about, centrally, is the problem of interpretation itself. That is what is at stake here. With that challenge in mind, we turn to the second phase of Thomas's photographic investigation. Even as the girls are dressing him after the orgy, Thomas is already staring once again at the photos he's mounted on the wall, and a new thought has come to him. And again, the viewer must wait briefly to share in that new point of view. Thomas makes another enlargement of a photo that he took near the end of the series. This one reveals the blurry figure of a dead body. Suddenly, seeing it, Thomas realizes he didn't stop a killing. But whose body is it? And why is it there when in a shot that he took just moments earlier, there was only a gun? Suddenly, Thomas's attitude changes as he attempts to decipher cause and effect. His attitude changes from self-congratulation to horror and to a humbling realization of the limits of his control and knowledge as a photographer. The camera detects more than his conscious eye, but its disclosures are so disquieting that they make Thomas question reality itself. Now, he doesn't question it because, as in Debord's paradigm, he has seen so many mediated images in his culture that, like the girls, he can't separate reality from reproductions. No, Thomas now questions the reality of what the blown-up photograph discloses for two other reasons. First, the image of the dead man is so blurry, so close to being a kind of abstract shape, that Thomas could be mistaken, could possibly be imagining something there that isn't really there. Maybe it isn't a dead body. After all, a photograph is a printed image on a piece of paper, and when the paper is this blurry, who can be sure? But Thomas also questions the reality of the image of the dead figure, or what appears to be a dead figure, for a more compelling reason. It's because he doesn't want to believe it. When could this killing have occurred? Well, presumably, it could only have happened in an interval between his shots when he was arguing with the woman who demanded he give her the photographs. If this is the timeline, as he senses, then his photographic presence, far from stopping a killing, may have actually facilitated the shooting by giving the gunman an opportunity to fire and drag the body out of view. Now, this is not a reality that Thomas wants to believe in. It is one that he would prefer, if possible, to disavow, because he does really, for all of his faults, seem to have a conscience. So, in a state then of both epistemological uncertainty and moral unease, Thomas returns to the park that night to confirm that the blow-up photograph, the record of this apparently dead body, corresponds to material reality. And he finds the dead body, which has indeed, one might say, been blown up by gunfire in its own way. Have a look. Near the bushes, Thomas and the viewer recognize the corpse of the older man whom the woman was with in the park, and who presumably was killed when she left him to try to take the film away from Thomas. Well, Thomas is so appalled and mystified by this disclosure that he can't, or perhaps doesn't want, to trust his eyes. After all, eyes are lenses. So, in the silence of the park at night, to confirm what he sees, he touches the dead man's face. Sure enough, he verifies its corporeal reality. Then, rattled by this eerie scene of being alone in the dark with a dead body, he runs away, retracing the route that led him into the park to take the pictures that morning to begin with, but also recalling in that long shot Antonioni gives us the flight of the woman after she had left Thomas, who refused to give her the film. Thomas, however, is running here also because he's afraid of being spotted in this incriminating position at a murder scene. He looks around to make sure he's alone. In short, he's very much in the position of vulnerability and exposure that the woman was in when he photographed her in the same location. For the first time, Thomas, who is so empowered behind the lens as a voyeur, now has the sense of what it might be like to be on the other end, to be the object of the invasive eyes or voyeuristic gaze of another. Now, this is not the end of Thomas's search for information. He has no idea why this man was killed, or if the killer was the man that he saw trying to open his trunk. At least he doesn't know for sure, nor does he have any clear understanding of the woman's relationship either to the killer or to the victim. Thomas knows truly far more than he did before he developed the photographs, but the real truth, the underlying truth, the complete truth of what occurred and why it occurred will forever elude him. Now, Some Clay That Blow Up is a film that is predicated upon a suggestion that reality itself is being shown as an illusion. But But that is the case only in Thomas's studio. Outside that studio, there's no question that reality exists, that it is not simply a immaterial projection. The dead body that Thomas sees and touches, it's not an illusion. It's real. Nor is that gun that he captured on film that killed this man, presumably, illusory. That, too, was real. These things exist, and the camera recorded their existence. So Blow Up doesn't then question the existence of physical reality or our ability to affirm physical reality. Rather, it questions the ability of the individual mind ever to know reality objectively, and even more, the ability of the mind to interpret what it sees in a complete or coherent way. Now, interpretation is even more subjective, I think, for Antonioni than perception is. Just as Thomas chose to take the pictures from specific angles, so too he chooses to assemble them interpretively in his own personal way in his studio. And this private but ultimately indeterminate collection of photographic images is what he is left with, trying to understand but unable to. Now, the description I've just offered of Thomas's hermeneutic efforts is consistent with an observation that Antonioni made even before he directed Blow Up. Quote, "We know that under the revealed image there is another one, which is more faithful to reality, and under this one that is yet another, and again another under the last one, down to the true image of that absolute mysterious reality that no one will ever see, or perhaps not until the decomposition of every image, of every reality." To distill that statement, one might say he's suggesting photography can and does get us closer to a grasp of objective, full reality, but it can never peel away all the layers and take us down to what Antonioni calls the true image, some absolute, irreducible reality. No, there will always be uncertainty. In short, complete truth about anything in life will always escape us, as it escapes Thomas in his detective quest, and as it may well elude even the most determined interpreters of Blow Up itself. When Thomas returns to his neighborhood, he is shaken. And so instead of going into his flat, feeling a need for comfort, he goes to the usual source, the neighboring apartment where Patricia lives. He enters to the diegetic sound of a jazz recording, but he sees no one until he peers through the blinds into Bill and Patricia's bedroom. Then, still a shameless voyeur, he gazes on them as they are having sex. Thomas seems troublingly to have learned very little about the dangers, moral or otherwise, of spying on private lives. Well, when Patricia sees him looking, she first shakes her head as if to say, "Don't watch," but then she smiles and moans, perhaps imagining that she's making love to Thomas rather than to her husband. Now, while promiscuity may be sterile and unrewarding, and it certainly is shown that way in this film, for Antonioni, marriage and domestic partnership in his films is usually a trap that breeds unhappiness. Thomas knows from his own experience, being separated from his domestic partner, that this is true, but we also find a similar discord in domestic partnership in La Ventura, and indeed that is the problem at the very center of the films The Night and The Eclipse. When Patricia joins Thomas shortly hereafter in his apartment, the studio has been ransacked. This occurred during Thomas's visit to the park that evening. Both the negatives and the enlarged prints of what he captured in the park have been stolen. The only remaining image is one that he had hidden. It's the enlarged, grainy image of the corpse that drove him back to the park. Now, in an extreme close-up, this photograph's surface of abstract black and white recalls the black and white canvas that Bill was scrutinizing, you recall, earlier in the film. Patricia notices this resemblance. It looks like one of Bill's pictures. But unlike the painter, Thomas can't get a handle on the meaning of the image that he has been studying, which has been extracted from a larger photographic field. Have a look at their conversation.
Were you looking for something just now?
No?
Oh. don't think so.
I saw a man killed this morning.
Where?
Shot. Some sort of park.
Are you sure?
He's still there.
Who was he?
Someone.
How did it happen?
I don't know. I didn't see.
You didn't see.
No.
Shouldn't you call the police?
That's the body.
Looks like one of Bill's paintings.
Yes.
Will you help me? I don't know what to do.
What is it?
I wonder why they shot him.
I didn't ask.
This is a paradigmatic instance of the failure of communication that I noted is such a major theme in Antonioni. Thomas can't answer the questions that Patricia has about the killing, and she deflects his questions about her unhappy relationship with Bill. Wearing a see-through knit top, she says, "Help me, I don't know what to do," but when then Thomas asks what she wants of him, she turns the conversation around with an unrelated question, "I wonder why they shot him." Well, Thomas and the viewer would like to know the answer to that too, but at this moment, the reality of the moment, the focus of the scene isn't the murder, but rather the long-standing sexual tension between Patricia and Thomas. Note that when Thomas tells her, "I saw a murder this morning," he identifies the camera with his own vision. "I saw a murder," seeming to forget that the killing was hidden from his gaze until he blew up the footage. Although Thomas would, as we've seen, like to disavow responsibility for that death, he says that he saw the murder because he feels implicated in the crime, and thus he too needs help. But neither he nor Patricia can offer the other any genuine support. All they offer the other are questions and evasive, often monosyllabic responses. This elliptical conversation ends in awkward silence. Although Thomas is skeptical of the counterculture, he shares the counterculture's distrust of authority. And this helps to explain why when Patricia asks if he has or will contact the police, he suggests that he won't. And in fact, he never reports the crime to the police. Instead, he calls his publisher Ron's house and tells Ron's wife that he wants to show him something, presumably to show the body in the park. But as Thomas drives through London on his way to pick up Ron at a party, he sees by chance the red-haired woman. She is window shopping with a man. Thomas pursues them on foot through a maze of dark streets and alleyways and corridors. The mise-en-scène here of the urban labyrinth reflects Thomas's own confusion. But the couple elude him, just as the meaning of the killing eludes him. Instead, Thomas finds himself entering unexpectedly through a door into a rock concert where a 60s band called the Yardbirds is performing. They were one of the pioneering groups in psychedelic rock in London in the period, in the 1960s. Here they are.
Give him a song again. It's all gone, reason why you made me cry for telling me you didn't see the future for. I'll have no more if you wanna know I love you so. And I don't wanna let you go. When you see I'm going on, you want to really love me, I'm going on. Be a turn to cry, I'm going on. You wish to tell you go into your mind. Ain't gonna find all my kind.
It's here, I think, in this scene, that Antonioni's critique of mod London and the counterculture is most scathing. When Thomas enters, the young crowd is zombie-like, expressionless, a study in collective alienation from the music, from one another, and even, it seems, from their own emotions. But this changes when the lead guitarist, Jeff Beck, gets so angry at the faulty amplification that he smashes and stops his instrument as they are playing Stroll On. This act of pointless violence changes the silent crowd into a riotous mob, especially when he tosses the shattered guitar from the stage. When Thomas catches what's left of it, the mob descends on him as if he were holding a piece of the true cross. The prospect of touching this fetishized bit of celebrity turns them on, just as the violence on stage unleashes their primal aggression, putting them in touch with the one feeling they do seem to be able to get in touch with, and that is violence. This is the dark side, one might say, of the playful anarchy of the ragging students we saw at the start of the film. When Thomas escapes outside, he casts the relic aside, casts it off in front of a fashion display window, as if to say, what do I want with this? Both the broken guitar and the fashion display are part of the artificial, unreal world of London that he despises. Finally, he finds Ron, his publisher, who is stoned at a pot-smoking party, another site of mediated reality and alienation for Antonioni. As the partygoers ingest narcotics, there's no conversation, no communication, only desultory laughter, mumbling, snippets of songs in the background. They're so disoriented and cut off from material reality that when Verushka appears and Thomas says, "I thought you were supposed to be in Paris," she replies, "I am in Paris." Thomas drags Ron into the hallway and says, "Listen, someone's been killed. I want you to see the corpse. We have to get a shot of it." Now, he's really asking Ron here for two contradictory things. First, he wants Ron to share the unbearable truth of what he saw and touched earlier that evening, to verify it. But second, he wants the publisher to corroborate his plan to photograph the dead man, thereby converting a traumatic reality into a pictorial image. To do that would be to diminish both its reality, to render it a picture, and the guilt that he feels as a result of his presence in the park when the murder occurred. But Ron is so drugged out that he's incapable of listening and responding. Instead, he grabs Thomas by the shirt and leads him back into the drug party, and it is there that Thomas wakes up the next morning alone in a large house. More alienation. Now this brings us to the notorious ending of Blow Up. Fascinating for some, infuriating for others, baffling for most. Up until now, the film has chronicled one full day in Thomas's life, and we end where the film credit sequence began. We start with one morning, we end the next morning. But also, we not only end again in the morning, but we end in the same place, against the green lawn of the park where the credits first appeared. Thomas walks there, camera in hand, because he's going to photograph the dead man. Ron won't join him, he'll do it on his own. But when he arrives, the corpse is gone. It vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. The tree near where the body lay is the same one. We see its blowing branches overhead and assume in that shot that Thomas is looking up at them in bewilderment. But our senses here are deceived, because when the camera then tilts down to Thomas, we realize that he wasn't the source of that visual impression. This separation from his perspective anticipates a moment to come in the film's closing seconds when Thomas, our primary register in this film, himself disappears before our eyes. Now, as Thomas walks aimlessly through the park, the group of revelers we saw at the beginning drive past him in an open car. They're all in whiteface now, and even more motley dressed than before. They stop at a tennis court where two members of the crew begin to play a match using invisible rackets and an invisible ball, while the others watch outside along the fence. Take a look. Thomas watches this pantomime with the others, and at times we share his view as the camera is positioned just over Thomas's shoulder. He watches with such interest that we suspect he sees in the pantomime, in this mime performance, a version of his own labors to get at truth that is as much a phantom as the tennis ball is here. Indeed, for some interpreters, this game played without a tangible ball represents the elusive nature of all reality, whether it's registered by the mind, registered by the eye, or by the camera. And I share that view. We strive throughout this film, along with Ron, along with Thomas, for a verifiable understanding of the world and the events in it. And the problem is we do get closer to truth, but the full truth of anything always eludes him. As Antonio suggests, the full truth always eludes our perceptual and interpretive grasp. We see this, I think, in Thomas's inability to move from what seemed to be bits of photographic evidence to an understanding of what really occurred, let alone why it occurred. Perhaps Thomas sees in the pantomime tennis his own efforts to know reality as an absurd game in which he was going through empty motions that yield nothing. Perhaps he's also reminded here in this silent game of the futility of language. In any case, Thomas, I think, identifies with the game enough so that when the phantom ball goes over the fence, he retrieves it and pretends to throw that ball back, thereby entering the pantomime himself. And then, as the Herbie Hancock jazz score from the beginning starts up again, the photographer himself disappears. Like the invisible ball, like the photographs stolen from his studio, and like the disappearing body in the park, Thomas himself vanishes. For one critic, this moment represents, quote, the pure look of the director, reminding us that everything that we have seen in the film, everything that Antonioni has shown us, has after all been a manufactured illusion which he can make appear and disappear. That may well be true, but I think there's more to this final self-reflexive gesture than just that. I do not believe that Antonioni is, as some have insisted, teasing us or mocking the viewer here. Instead, I think he's doing something else. Rather than being asked now to contemplate and interpret an image at the end of this film, as we have been throughout it, we are given the erasure of an image, the image of the photographer himself, and then we're given, just a moment later, the erasure of the film. The film itself ends, disappears. Now, in this double gesture, I think, what we find is Antonioni's way of saying that he doesn't expect us to penetrate the mystery of what we have seen any more than Thomas could. It's as a way as he's suggesting you can now stop struggling to do this. I would suggest that through these disappearances, he's encouraging us instead to reside in the epistemological half-knowledge, in the interpretive ambiguity that is his film and that is life. Here's how Antonioni himself put it, quote, I don't know what reality is like. Reality escapes us. It changes continually. When we think we've reached it, the situation is already something else. I always doubt what I see, what an image shows me, because I imagine what's beyond that, and what's beyond the image is ultimately unknown. Well, after enlisting our interpretive efforts for 2 hours, Blow Up finally, I think, encourages us to accept human existence as a state of perpetual uncertainty.